Amy Bradley disappeared in the early hours of March 24, 1998, while on a cruise with her family. She was last seen on nightclub cameras dancing with a band member. Her father discovered she was missing just a few hours later. So what happened to Amy Bradley? Amy Lynn Bradley was born May 12, 1974 in Petersburg, Virginia, to Ivor and Ronald Bradley, an insurance executive. She grew up in Chesterfield County alongside her younger brother Ron Jr., who went by the nickname Brad, and they formed a close-knit bond. Athletic and determined, Amy earned a basketball scholarship to Longwood University, where she graduated with a degree in physical education. She was also an exceptional swimmer and had previously worked as a lifeguard. These were skills that made her confident in the water. While in college, Amy's friends said she came out as gay to her family. According to her ex-girlfriend, her parents were initially not happy and disappointed, with her father even going as far as to write a long letter to Amy's girlfriend at the time, explaining how he wasn't happy about their relationship. So it doesn't seem that the family were supportive at all. But weirdly, Amy's brother Brad recently said that Amy had come out to the family as bisexual when she was in college, 3 years before the cruise, and that no one cared. So if she was to commit suicide by going off the railing, it wasn't to do with her sexuality. But this alleged letter to the ex-girlfriend directly contradicts this. Brad also said that Amy had a boyfriend at the time of the cruise, and he even helped look for her. Apparently, he was the manager of a restaurant in Virginia, possibly the same one that Amy worked at. One of his suppliers gave him a Dos Equis watch, which he gave to Amy as a gift, and she was wearing this watch when she disappeared. Could this guy have just been a beard, and Amy said this to her family to get them off her back about dating women? And according to the Netflix documentary Amy Bradley is Missing, Amy was in the process of getting back together with an ex-girlfriend, Molly McClure. Molly said that they knew each other in high school but didn't start dating until after college, but Amy admitted to kissing someone else and they took some time apart. They had plans to reunite after Amy's cruise, and exactly 1 month before her disappearance, Amy eerily sent Molly a message in a bottle, asking her to forgive her for cheating. In the letter, she wrote, "There is an ocean between us, like I am on a desert island waiting for you to rescue me." It's possible that Amy, knowing her family wouldn't approve of being gay, came out to them as bisexual to soften the blow, so to speak. So it's not clear whether Amy had a boyfriend or a girlfriend at the time of her disappearance, but it does seem clear that her father, at least, wasn't too happy that Amy liked women. Could this possibly be her reason to jump off the railing and fall to her death? Or didn't she jump at all, and someone took her off the ship? Her father, Ron, through his employer, had won an all-expenses-paid week-long cruise for him and his wife, but they decided to make it a family trip and paid an extra $2,000 for their kids, 23-year-old Amy and 21-year-old Brad, to join them. The Bradleys boarded the Royal Caribbean International cruise ship Rhapsody of the Seas on March 21, 1998. The 915-foot ship was just 1 year old and had 11 decks. It was set to depart from San Juan in Puerto Rico, heading for the island of Curacao, with 2,435 passengers on board. According to her family, Amy was apprehensive about being stuck on a ship with hundreds of strangers out on the ocean. But after some convincing, she decided to join them. Amy bought some postcards to send to her friends, and one of them read, "Hey girl, it's gorgeous here. We leave for Aruba tomorrow. I'll be home Saturday at 10. But unfortunately, Amy would never make it home. On March 23rd, after spending the day exploring Aruba, Amy and her family dressed up for a formal dinner on the ship. At the restaurant, a photographer was taking pictures, and this would be the last time the family were photographed together. After dinner, the family went to the casino before going back to the cabin to get changed. They then went to the 9th floor deck to watch the ship's band Blue Orchid play. While Ron and Ivor retired to the cabin at about 1:30 a.m., Amy and Brad decided to carry on partying. At around 2:45 a.m., Ron woke suddenly, unable to shake a feeling of unease. Earlier in the night, his son Brad had gotten into a bit of trouble for dancing with a married woman, an incident that nearly ended in a fight, and Ron wanted to make sure everything had calmed down. so he decided to get out of bed, head up to the Viking lounge to check on his kids. When he arrived, Brad was on the dance floor, laughing and dancing with a few women, and Amy, meanwhile, was up on the mezzanine level, sipping a drink and chatting casually with some of the ship's crew members. Ron saw that all was well, so he went back to bed. That night, Amy was seen chatting with a man named Alistair Douglas, whose nickname was Yellow. He was the band's bassist, and some people think he had something to do with her disappearance. Yellow explained his interactions with Amy that night.
I went down like I normally do, changed my clothes, had a quick shower, and I came up. When I came up, she was on the deck, on the decking outside.
He said that when his band finished playing and were packing up, Amy came up to him and told him she enjoyed the set. He thanked her and she told him she played the saxophone, and they had a brief conversation about that. He told her that the band was going to the nightclub for a bit. According to him, this was a line he'd use on women. He'd invite them up to the club even though it was forbidden to have sexual interactions with passengers. First, he had to go shower and change, and on his way back, he saw Amy chain-smoking on the deck. He asked her why she was smoking so much, and she told him her parents found out she was gay and forced her to come on this cruise. It appeared that the stress of the situation was making Amy smoke a lot. Yellow didn't know what to say to that, so he suggested they go into the Viking Crown Lounge, dance for a couple of songs before he had to vacate the passenger area by 1 a.m., which was a requirement for the ship's entertainers. Inside the club, the cameras recorded them dancing, and Amy appears to be having an okay time. After a couple of songs, Yellow told Amy that he had to leave and went to his room that he shared with another musician. His key card showed that he entered his room around this time, and he said he did not leave the room again. At 3:35 a.m., Brad used his key card to enter the family's cabin. Amy entered just 5 minutes later, and the pair sat out on the balcony and talked for a bit. According to Brad, Amy mentioned needing to buy cigarettes. Brad eventually wanted to go to sleep, but Amy said she was feeling sick, so she wanted to stay on the balcony in the fresh air. Amy's father woke up at 5:30 a.m. and saw Amy's legs, suggesting she was lying on the sun lounger, possibly asleep. He went back to bed and was woken again by an unknown noise around 6 a.m. He noticed that the balcony door was open and Amy was gone, but her sandals were placed neatly together by the lounger. We don't know if any other pairs of Amy's shoes were missing. If she had left the cabin on her own, she likely would have put on another pair of shoes. Ron immediately tried to find Amy. He said, "I left to try and go up and find her. When I couldn't find her, I didn't really know what to think, because it was very much unlike Amy to leave and not tell us where she was going." After Ron searched the common areas of the cruise ship, he woke up the rest of the family at about 6:30 a.m. and told them Amy was missing. At 7 a.m., Yellow claims he was woken by a phone call from the manager asking if there was a woman with him. He said that there wasn't, and was told that the woman he was seen speaking with last night had gone missing. He was told to stay in his room with his roommate, and then later he took a polygraph test, which was inconclusive. According to Yellow, he last saw Amy at 1 a.m. when he left her in the club. But 3 witnesses claimed to have seen Amy on the upper deck with Yellow between 5:30 a.m. and 5:45 a.m. They also testified to seeing Yellow hand Bradley a drink containing dark liquid. They claimed Amy and Yellow arrived in the elevator at the same time, and that Yellow was then seen leaving the upper deck alone shortly after 6 a.m. Of course, eyewitness accounts are often unreliable, but it's worth noting. And this wouldn't be the only sighting of Yellow and Amy, which we'll get to a bit later. When Amy vanished, her family immediately alerted the ship's crew, begging them to halt the disembarkation of nearly 2,000 passengers and to make an urgent announcement over the loudspeakers. Their pleas, however, were brushed aside. The purser's office insisted it was too early to sound an alarm, but the ship was docking in Curaçao and the gangways would be lowered any minute. Ron begged the office to lock down the ship to prevent anyone from leaving, but they refused. The passengers had paid good money for this cruise, and they weren't going to disrupt them. They docked the ship, opened the doors, and guests poured out to enjoy a day on sunny Curaçao Island. While some people think this is evidence that the crew weren't taking the disappearance seriously, we have to remember that Amy was an adult, and she had only been missing an hour at this point. so it's reasonable that she could just be hanging out somewhere by herself, which she was allowed to do. It wasn't until 7:50 a.m, after most passengers had already left the ship, that an announcement was finally made, but it didn't exactly convey an emergency. Will Amy Bradley please come to the purser's desk? By then, crucial hours had slipped away. Adding to the unease, Amy's brother Brad later recalled the moment that struck him as chilling. At about 9 a.m, Brad was standing on the top deck looking down, hoping to spot Amy in the crowds. Yellow approached him and said, "Hey man, I'm sorry to hear about your sister." Brad described the timing of that remark as suspicious. What was he sorry about exactly? Amy was surely going to be found any minute. Around noon, Amy's mother begged the ship's captain to distribute a picture of Amy, but he refused, saying he didn't want to alarm the other passengers. Between 12:15 and 1 p.m, crew members conducted a search of the ship and were instructed to search their own cabins, meaning if any crew member was hiding Amy, no one would know. Or if a passenger was involved in her disappearance, they could have left with Amy once the ship docked. The Bradleys went to look for Amy in town, but the captain told them that the ship would not wait for them, and they would be sailing again that evening. So the Bradleys decided to stay in Curacao. The captain also had Royal Caribbean fly in a lawyer, and he told the Bradleys that they were not allowed to contact him or any crew again unless the lawyer was present. The Coast Guard conducted a 4-day search of the waters in case Amy had fallen overboard. There were helicopters, radar planes, fishing boats, all searching, but they found nothing. This was the approximate location of the ship when Amy would have fallen overboard, between 5:30 and 6 a.m. This ship had passed through the canal, under the bridge, and was soon to turn to dock at the wharf. If Amy fell overboard here, she likely would have been found, as it was not the deep ocean. When the official search ended, the Bradley family flew home to the States. If Amy was still alive, she was now alone. The cruise line had taken the stance that Amy fell or jumped overboard, but the Bradleys said that despite Amy being a good swimmer and a trained lifeguard, she was scared of heights, and the drop from their balcony to the sea was about 80 feet, a very long drop indeed. According to them, she was so afraid she would not go near the balcony railing unless she was holding on to someone else. And the railing was chest height on Amy, meaning she would have had to have climbed on something first. Well, possibly she could have climbed onto the table, which was found pushed up against the railing. However, the Bradleys' cabin was cleaned that day, so it's possible that the cleaning crew moved the table. But if Amy was so afraid of heights, is it likely she would have climbed on the table to sit on the railing? Ron was certain that when he woke at 5:30 and saw Amy on the balcony door was shut. When he woke again at 6 a.m, it was open. This has convinced him that Amy left the cabin, and a witness supports this. A college freshman named Crystal Roberts reported, "I saw Amy and the band member walk over and up to the next deck above us, and about 10 minutes later he came walking around by himself." If the witness is correct, it means that Yellow lied about the last time he saw Amy. He claimed he left at 1 a.m. and never saw her again. Ron's boss flew down to Curacao to help the Bradleys. He chartered a plane to fly them to the cruise ship's next destination, St. Martin. Once there, they boarded the ship again and demanded to speak to the captain, saying the FBI is coming. But the lawyer they had flown in stopped them from seeing the captain and told them that the FBI didn't have jurisdiction. Eventually, probably to avoid any bad publicity, the Royal Caribbean allowed 2 private investigators hired by the Bradleys to search the ship, but only if they wore casual clothes so as not to alarm the passengers. But their search was rather fruitless since they only noted that Amy's ID was left in the cabin and her camera was in the safe. But they did discover that the ship had not been thoroughly searched as first claimed by the captain, again because they didn't want to alarm the passengers. So the crew searched their own quarters and some common areas, but that was about it. The Bradleys were convinced that Amy had been lured or taken off the ship. They weren't buying a she fell overboard theory or she committed suicide theory. And one of the reasons why they believe this is because of those photos that were taken of the family at the fancy restaurant the night before she vanished. From the very first days on board, Amy had told her parents that several of the waiters were making her feel uncomfortable. This went far beyond flirting. She described their behaviour as unsettling and intrusive. On the night before Amy disappeared, she and Brad left the ship's restaurant to try their luck in the casino, while Ron and Ivor stayed behind to enjoy a few drinks with Ron's colleagues. As they sat sipping champagne, one of the waiters, Eduardo Cabrita, a young man who had already apparently been giving Amy the creeps, approached their table. He asked Ron and Ivor to pass along a message to Amy. It was an invitation to join him and some of the crew for drinks on shore in Aruba, specifically at Carlos and Charlie's, a popular Mexican chain of restaurants. This restaurant was the same place where another American was last seen, Natalie Holloway. She was an 18-year-old American high school graduate from Mountain Brook, Alabama, who disappeared from Aruba on May 30th, 2005. She was last seen outside Carlos and Charlie's getting into a cab with 3 men, one of whom had conflicting stories, and in one of his stories he claimed that he had sold Natalie into sexual slavery, but later admitted to killing her. But back to Amy, she declined when her parents told her about this invitation. At first, this might have seemed like nothing more than an overconfident waiter hitting on a passenger, but in hindsight, Ron and Ivor couldn't shake a darker suspicion. Was someone trying to lure Amy away from the safety of her family? After Amy's disappearance, the waiter was questioned by the FBI, and he claimed that Ivor, Amy's mother, had asked him what the procedures were when people fell overboard. Ivor denied this conversation happened and demanded that the waiter be given a polygraph, but he never was. Ivor was convinced that the waiter tried to lure Amy off the ship and tried to deflect and blame Ivor for the disappearance. This fear of Amy being lured away only deepened when they discovered something strange later that evening. Like all passengers, Amy had posed for photos as she entered the restaurant that night. Those photos, along with all the other guests' images, were supposed to be displayed at a stall for purchase. Yet when Ron went to look, every single photo featuring Amy was missing. The ship's photographer confirmed that they'd been printed, but they had vanished without explanation. To the Bradleys, this wasn't just unsettling. It suggested that Amy had been deliberately singled out. Whether it was Yellow, the waiter, or someone else entirely, they began to suspect that Amy might have been targeted for something far worse, a calculated abduction and possible trafficking. Amy's mother, Ivor, said, "Amy would have been a trophy. Amy would have been someone that I believe could have been picked out and fingered to move off that ship. She could have been held and hidden. She could have possibly been drugged and taken from that ship." And while it's true that the majority of human trafficking victims are vulnerable, including children, the homeless, and drug addicted, it is not unheard of for white women to be trafficked. Steve Reeves, the editor of a cruise line trade magazine, wrote about this case, saying, "There's a rumor and legend surrounding slavery in the Southern Caribbean. It's not uncommon knowledge in the maritime community that young white women are considered to be very desirable to foreign procurers. Men, women, and children of all ages and backgrounds can be victims of trafficking." The Counter-Trafficking Data Collaborative released a report analysing trafficking victims from 2002 to 2022 and found that 71% of trafficking victims were female. When it comes to the most trafficked age group, there were 2. 19% were between the ages of 9 to 17, which is expected, and surprisingly, 19% were aged between 30 to 38, which debunks the notion that traffickers don't want older people. The report also shows that there were 194 countries of exploitation and 190 nationalities of victims, showing that trafficking happens all over the world to people from almost every country. In fact, human trafficking is a $150 billion global industry. There have been several witness sightings since Amy's disappearance, and some are more credible than others. A taxi driver in Curacao said a woman matching Amy's description came up to him asking to borrow his phone, but then ran away. A Puerto Rican police cadet said he saw Amy being forced into a taxi by a man in a baseball cap. In August 1998, probably one of the most plausible sightings, David Carmichael, a Canadian IT worker, was on a diving vacation with friends in Curacao when he saw something unsettling. He said, "I noticed 3 people walking along the beach. One of them was a young girl, and she was flanked by 2 fellows. She had tattoos. One of them was of a gecko, the other was of a Tasmanian devil. The girl walked towards me. She started to stare at me. Just as she was about to say something, the fellow motioned her away. In May of '99, I saw the segment on Unsolved Mysteries. The minute I saw her picture and saw her face, I realized that was the girl on the beach." It wasn't until David returned to Canada and saw a news report about Amy's disappearance that the pieces clicked into place. He was convinced the woman he saw was Amy. After all, he did get a good look at her when he and his friend went to the beach cafe, and Amy and the 2 men were there. They weren't sitting too far apart, and according to Carmichael, sometimes Amy would look at him as if trying to communicate. When Carmichael spoke to the FBI, he identified one of the men as Alistair Yellow Douglas. The other was blonde with a ponytail. He was also able to accurately describe all of Amy's classic 90s tattoos. a Tasmanian devil on her shoulder, a blue gecko curled around her navel, a symbol on her ankle, and a sun on her lower back. He saw them all and described them to the FBI. He also correctly described the watch that she had been wearing, the one she was given by her alleged boyfriend. He said, "I am haunted by that encounter with Amy. I know it was her." The FBI quickly returned to Carousel to investigate, but by the time agents arrived, the woman, if it had been Amy, was gone. A year later, in 1999, another disturbing claim emerged. Chief Petty Officer William Hefner went to the Stellaris Hotel in Curacao, which was nearby to the docks. This hotel was off limits to American military personnel due to its bad reputation. Some people think this place was a brothel. According to his statement, a woman approached him, identified herself as Amy Bradley, and pleaded for help, but rather than assist her, he left without intervening. Even worse, he did not report this sighting until 3 years later when he saw Amy's picture on the cover of People magazine, allegedly because he feared disciplinary action for being at the hotel while on duty. By then, any chance of tracing the lead had long since evaporated, and the hotel had actually burned down by this point. But he said, "She told me she got off that ship and she left on her own because she was going to score drugs. She said, well, me and my brother were partying and I went ashore to go get drugs, and now I'm stuck here with these guys." In 2005, a woman named Judy Mora came forward with a chilling account. While shopping in a department store in Barbados, Mora went into the restroom and encountered a young woman who looked similar to Amy. The woman wasn't alone. She was accompanied by 3 men who loitered outside. Speaking in harsh tones, Mora overheard them threatening the woman, mentioning a deal she was apparently trying to back out of. As they were leaving the restroom, the woman managed to seize a brief moment alone with Mora. In a hurried whisper, she said her name was Amy and that she was from Virginia. Before Mora could respond, the men grabbed the woman by the arms and led her away. Mora later gave investigators a detailed description of the encounter, which was used to create composite sketches. Despite this promising lead, the sketches led nowhere, and no trace of the mysterious woman was ever found. Amy was also allegedly seen in San Francisco at Fisherman's Wharf. She was with 2 men, and they were watching a street musician. The witness claims she knew it was Amy Bradley, and when the 2 men had realized Amy had been recognized, they turned and dragged her away. The witness said that Amy looked back pleadingly, and at one point stumbled and almost fell. The FBI released sketches of the 2 men, but nothing ever came of it. Probably the most plausible sighting of Amy was the 2005 photograph. The Bradleys received an anonymous email from someone saying they had evidence that Amy was trafficked. They sent a link to a website. From 2002 until 2008, this photograph appeared on this website for an escort resort known as Affordable Adult Vacations. The woman in the picture, going by the name Jazz, looked just like Amy. If you take away the makeup and big hair, the facial features do look similar. Ivor, Amy's mother, said, "Seeing the photos, it was a terrible thing, a level of panic. All I could keep thinking is that my daughter? We all looked at it, the nose, the chin, the hair. It took my breath away." The Bradleys were sure that this was Amy, and it was evaluated by Wesley Neville, a certified forensic artist at the International Association for Identification. He found that the images forensically matched and concluded that Jazz and Amy were the same person. But the website's IP address couldn't be traced, so nothing more was done. But of the police sketches that were drawn after the alleged sighting in San Francisco, one appears to resemble a man named Alfred Cotton. Through their company Tropical Adult Vacations, Alfred Cotton and his wife Jennifer allegedly exploited women by bringing them into prostitution for international sex travelers. They advertised adult holidays for people coming to the Caribbean where they would match the tourist with a woman. According to the website, all of the women were regularly tested by doctors for disease and were high-quality escorts. All spoke Spanish, but some also spoke English. The girls at the adult sex resort are not just prostitutes off the street that the other Dominican Republic sex vacation resorts use. Customers of the Cottons would be met at the airport by a company employee named Paco, who would bring them to the resort where they would then choose from a number of women for however long they would want them. No definitive link has been made between Amy Bradley and the Cottons, except, curiously, Alfred Cotton appears in many images advertising Affordable Adult Vacations, the same website that advertised Jazz, or possibly Amy, as one of its women. He's also pictured on the Affordable Adult Vacations yacht. So if this Jazz lady is actually Amy, then it's possible that she was indeed spotted by witnesses with Alfred Cotton. However, this image of Jazz shows her navel area, and although the image isn't exactly clear, there doesn't seem to be a gecko tattoo around her navel, so maybe Jazz is not Amy after all. But the Bradleys were so hell-bent on finding Amy that they fell victim to a scam. In the fall of 1999, Amy's parents received unexpected correspondence from a man named Frank Jones, introducing himself as a former US Army Special Forces officer, and claiming to have a team of ex-soldiers. Jones told the Bradleys that he could help rescue their daughter. Jones claimed his team had tracked Amy to a housing complex in Curacao, where she was supposedly being held by heavily armed Colombian traffickers. He described the compound as being surrounded by barbed wire and guards. To convince the family of his credibility, Jones said his team had observed a woman watching Amy's description, and even recited the lullaby that Ivor Bradley used to sing to her daughter, a detail that struck deeply with Amy's mother. Over the following months, Jones continued to send the Bradleys updates, feeding them alleged sightings of Amy and promising that a rescue mission was imminent. When he claimed his team was ready to move in, he said they needed more funding to set up the operation. Desperate for their daughter's return, the Bradleys sent him a total of $210,000, expecting a call announcing Amy's rescue. But that call never came. It was all a scam. Jones had fabricated the entire story to exploit the family's hope. He pleaded guilty to mail fraud in April 2002 and was sentenced to 5 years in prison. Amy was declared legally dead in absentia in 2010, and that same year a new piece of evidence washed ashore. A tourist on the west side of Aruba stumbled across a human jawbone washed up on a beach. Analysis revealed that it likely belonged to a Caucasian woman. They ruled it out as belonging to Natalie Holloway, but it's never been definitively linked to Amy. No further testing was done either, despite there being several missing Caribbean tourists at the time. Interestingly, Amy's disappearance isn't the only alarming incident that has happened on the cruise ship the Rhapsody of the Seas. On New Year's Day 2010, a 15-year-old passenger was raped by a crew member. She had been seasick during the cruise and was resting alone in a cabin when a man wearing a bartender's uniform entered. On September 22, 2019, a crew member died after going overboard while the ship was docked in the Croatian port of Dubrovnik. Royal Caribbean said the 35-year-old waiter had committed suicide, but his family in India deny this. And this would not be the first time that a crew member went overboard on one of the Royal Caribbean cruise ships. Between 2009 and 2019, 22 crew members went overboard, and most of these cases were never investigated. These incidents are reminiscent of Amy's case. The cruise line didn't care to investigate properly and took the view that she committed suicide or fell overboard. She absolutely could have, and it's probably the most likely explanation, but her body was never found in an area where it is likely that she would have been. Today, Yellow no longer entertains cruise ship passengers. Instead, he serves as a reverend performing exorcisms in a small mountain community in Grenada. He said as a result of his interactions with Amy that night that he has lost many jobs over the years and people still suspect him as having something to do with her disappearance. The Bradleys continue to search for Amy, who would now be in her 50s, believing she is still alive somewhere.